Good morning, Pinion Hills. Why don't we stand and let's worship the Lord together. Inspire your heavenly song. In excelsis Deo. In excelsis Deo. To Bethlehem and see Christ is birth, the angels sing. Come adore on bended knee Christ the Lord, the newborn King. Excelsis
Good, good. We're so glad you made it. Hope you're having a great weekend so far. We are continuing our series, Love Came Down, this morning.
Vaughn, do you want to know what I heard?
What did you hear?
I heard from Pastor Matt that today's message is going to be about birds.
It's a little random, buddy. It's a little birds.
Oh, and bees.
Bees, too.
Yes, birds
like,
and bees.
Birds and bees, like buzz bees.
Yeah.
Are you for real right now?
Yeah, dude.
Yeah. Oh, are you sure?
I'm excited because I like birds, dude.
Of course you do. Of course you do. Well, I did hear last week that this service was going to be rated R, okay? But headquarters came in and said it's going to be PG-13. But still, this is a good opportunity to take your kids during this next worship song to our amazing kids ministry experience. Don't we have an amazing kids ministry here?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, give it up for kids.
Yeah, someone's ready for it, okay? Hey, but they got a lot going on there. They got dancing for worship. They got activities that really just, really help students and kids see the message of Jesus come to life. So during this next song is a good opportunity to take your kids out into the plaza to the kids ministry, get them checked in. Let's go ahead and continue to worship this morning.
It's time for the sleeper to wake. It's time for the old winds to change. I hear the Spirit say, it's time. It's time for the dead man to rise. It's time for the great light to shine. Oh, I hear the Spirit say, it's time. Singing wide you heavenly gates, let the King of glory, let the King of glory come riding on your people's praise. Let the King of glory, let the King of glory, oh, let it ride. It's time for the sleeper to wake up. It's time for the old winds to change. Oh, I hear the Spirit say, it's time. It's time for the dead man to rise. It's time for the great light, oh, to shine. Oh, I hear the Spirit say, it's time. Yeah, come on, sing it out. Sing wide, heavenly gate. Let the King of glory, let the King of glory come riding on your people's praise. Let the King of glory fling wide, heavenly gate. Let the King of glory, oh yeah, come right in, Lord. light in. Let the light in. Let the light in. Amen. So good to see everyone this morning. Why don't you have a seat?
Well, good morning and welcome to Pinion Hills Community Church. Thank you for joining us as we continue on in our Christmas series. The theme verse throughout the last several weeks of this series is Matthew 1:18, which says this. Matthew writes, he says, "This is how the birth of Jesus, the Messiah, came about." In other words, here's what Matthew is saying. He's saying, here's the story of Jesus. This is the story of Christmas. This is the story of how love came down. Now, as you start unpacking the story of how love came down, as you start looking at part 1 and part 2 of the story, you realize it's kind of a crazy story. Part 1 is everything that happens before Jesus is born. Part 2 is everything that happens after Jesus is born. Now, this coming Friday is Christmas Eve. Whoop, whoop. Who's excited for Christmas Eve? Anybody excited for Christmas Eve? Yeah, me too. That's coming up this coming Friday, and we're talking about part 2 this Christmas Eve. But part 1, we've been talking about the last couple of weeks, and the story that leads up to the birth of Jesus is crazy. It's anything but normal. I came across a story recently of a woman who was in her 3rd trimester, and she was about to deliver her 2nd child. And so she starts going into labor, starts having contractions, and the contractions are at first about 10 minutes apart. So this isn't her first rodeo. She's had a child before. So she tells her husband, let's wait till the contractions are a little bit closer together. Let's not go to the hospital just yet. But they waited too long, and something unexpected happened. Check out this news story.
A pregnant woman in Vacaville didn't have time to make it to the hospital, so instead, her delivery room was her own front yard, and this was all caught on camera.
Thomas is the newest addition to the Johnson family. Mom Emily and Dad Michael couldn't wait for him to come into this world. They pictured a perfect birth.
We were anticipating getting the epidural done and just doing the normal birth plan at the hospital.
But just as much as they couldn't wait to meet Thomas, he apparently wanted to meet them more. The couple made its way out the door and down the driveway. That's as far as Emily would get.
Got to the car, stood at the car, and just said, no, I can't get into this car.
So right there, under the stars, Emily decided to let nature take its course.
I'm just going to get on the grass, and I'm going to be here. This is going to be my spot.
Yet, unlike most mothers, Emily had a chance to watch a replay of her birth.
Yep. That hurt.
That's because in this case, the doorbell camera delivered.
It was just so much pain and discomfort.
In that moment when Thomas lets his voice be known.
Birth on the lawn. Yeah, they have a great story to tell, and even better, a video to embarrass Thomas when he's 16 years later and high school friends come over. Edie Gulson, now back to you.
That's funny. I mean, it's not very common that you hear about a mother delivering birth on her front lawn. It's also not very common that the Ring camera captures the whole thing on camera. That's not normal, right? Well, it's similar to the Christmas story. The Christmas story is not normal. Now, it might feel normal to you because we talk about it and celebrate it every single year, but it's not a normal story by any stretch of the imagination. It's not something that is expected. Now, we begin to see that as we unpack the genealogy and the family tree of Jesus. That's what we've been talking about the last couple of weeks. Matthew chapter 1, starting in verse 1, says, "This is the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac, Isaac the father of Jacob, and Jacob was the father of Judah." Now, in those two or three verses, we've unpacked 4 names. Now, again, there's 104 names in Jesus' genealogy between the book of Matthew and the book of Luke, but we've only discovered 4 names so far, and all 4 of those names are crazy. All 4 of those people are crazy when you start to look at their story. Abraham, in my opinion, doesn't deserve a space in the genealogy of Jesus. He probably shouldn't shouldn't be in the family tree of Jesus, because Abraham had a conversation with God at one point. God said, I'm going to give you a son through your wife Sarai. Abraham says, I believe you, God. I'll wait on you. But then a couple decades go by. He says, you know what? I'm not waiting for God anymore. I'm going to sleep with my wife's maid instead. And I'm going to have a baby through the maid. And so he does. He has a baby named Ishmael. And so Ishmael, at first he's like, yay, Ishmael's the answer to my prayers. But then a couple years later, Abraham and his wife Sarai actually do deliver birth to their son, and they name him Isaac. Well, Isaac becomes his favorite son, so he basically kicks Ishmael out of the family. So Abraham did some pretty messed up stuff. Not sure if he's qualified to be in the family tree of Jesus. Next in line is Isaac. Isaac probably shouldn't be in the family tree of Jesus. Ishmael, the firstborn son of Abraham, should have been, but Isaac is there instead. So he shouldn't be there, but his name's listed in the family tree. Now Isaac has two sons, Esau and Jacob. Esau is the older of the sons, and Jacob is the younger. So normally the older one, that would be the one to carry on the family tree. But Jacob stole the blessing of the older brother Esau. So Esau should be in the family tree of Jesus, but his name's not there. Jacob is. So Jacob shouldn't be there. Well, then Jacob has a firstborn son, secondborn son, thirdborn son. Then the fourthborn son, his name's Judah. Just based on the placement alone, Judah probably shouldn't be in the family tree of Jesus. Now, as we continue on exploring the family tree and the genealogy of Jesus, the story gets crazier today. So if you happen to have your Bibles, turn to Genesis chapter 38. And yes, the family tree of Jesus starts all the way back in the book of Genesis. Genesis chapter 38. Now, as you turn there, let me catch you up to speed in case you missed last week, in case you weren't here. I just mentioned Jacob stole the blessing of Esau, the older brother. Esau, this is what we talked about last week, Esau gets mad. He gets really livid at his brother who stole his blessing that Isaac's supposed to give to him. So Esau starts breathing murderous threats toward his brother. He starts telling people, as soon as dad dies, as soon as Isaac dies, I'm going to murder my brother. I'm out for blood for Jacob. I'm going to take him out. So word gets back to Jacob, and through the mother, Rebekah pulls aside Jacob and says, look, Jacob, your older brother, Esau, wants to kill you. He's out for blood. So you need to run, Forrest, run. You need to get out of here. And so he does. Jacob takes off, and he splits, and he goes to a far-off land where Rebekah's brother, who's Jacob's uncle, lives. Now, he's a rancher. He's kind of like John Dutton from Yellowstone. So he's taking care of the sheep and the goats and the cattle and all that. So he's out there taking care of animals. Jacob splits. He goes off so Esau doesn't kill him. He shows up at his uncle's place. He says, Uncle Laban, good to see you. I haven't seen you since last Thanksgiving, whenever they saw each other last, whatever. So he says, can I work for you? So John Dutton / Laban says, yeah, I'll let you work for me. I'm a rancher. Yeah, you could come work for me. So Jacob begins working for his uncle. He works for about a month or so working for his uncle, and after a while, his uncle Laban comes up to him and says, look, just because you're my nephew, just because we're family, just because we're blood, doesn't mean that I shouldn't pay you. You've been working for me. Let me pay you. So tell me what you want. Tell me what you want. And so Jacob says, I'll tell you what I want, what I really, really want. I really, really, really want a wife. In fact, you've got two daughters over here. That one, Leah, she can't see very good. She needs LASIK. She needs corrective eye surgery. I don't want her. I want the other one. I want Rachel. I want the younger one. She's a fine mama jumma. I want that girl. So let me marry her. So Laban says, okay, tell you what, I'll agree to let you marry my younger daughter Rachel if you work for me for 7 years. And so Jacob says, done, deal, shake, let's do that. He works for 7 years for Uncle Laban. After 7 years, Jacob says, time to pay up, homie. All right, Laban, it's time for me to get to marry your daughter. I want to marry that girl. Marry her anyway. Marry that girl, no matter what you say. I want to marry your daughter. And so Laban says, okay, let's throw a celebration. It's the celebration. It is the wedding of Jacob and Rachel. All the friends and families are gathered around. Let's throw a big wedding celebration. So all the people come. It's a fantastic wedding. They have a lot of fun. Afterwards, Jacob goes to the bridal suite. He shows up to the bridal suite, and the father of the bride, Laban, brings the bride, and the bride comes into the bridal suite, and they bounce, chicka, bounce, bounce, brown chicken, brown cow. They do their thing. They seal the deal. And Jacob goes to sleep. Next morning, he wakes up, probably stretches, looks over, and he's like, who are you? Not Rachel. Rachel's not in his bed. Leah, the older sister, is in his bed. The father of the bride brought the wrong girl, and he slept with the wrong girl. So he gets out of bed. He goes to his father-in-law, Laban, / uncle, / John Dutton, same dude. So he goes to him and says, why did you do this? Why did you bring me the wrong girl? At which point Laban said, yeah, I did it on purpose. I did it on purpose because it's not our custom to marry off the younger girl before the older girl. So yeah, I let you marry the older girl before the younger girl. You got Leah, who can't see very good. If you would like to still marry Rachel, I'll let you, but you're going to have to work another 7 years for her. Now, if it's me, I'm like, I'm out, I'm done, I don't want anything to do with this crazy family. But Jacob says, fine. So he decides to work another 7 years in exchange for Rachel. So he gets Rachel on the front side of the 7 years. So now he's got 2 wives. He's got Leah and Rachel, sister wives this guy has. And so you can only imagine the drama that exists in this home, right? So Leah's jealous of Rachel. Rachel's jealous of Leah. Leah starts having kids. That's why Rachel's so jealous. She starts having her firstborn son, her secondborn son, thirdborn, fourthborn. That's Judah. He's in the lineage, the family tree of Jesus. Well, then Rachel is getting more and more jealous that Leah and Jacob are having kids. So Rachel goes to Jacob and says, give me children or I'll die. I'm going to kill myself if you don't give me kids. He's like, ain't my bad. I am able to produce children. Maybe you're the problem. Maybe God's the problem. I don't know, but it ain't me because I got 4 kids with your older sister. Anyway, so Rachel says, well, fine. Tell you what. Why don't you take my maid, Bilhah? That's a fun name. Why don't you take my maid, Bilhah, sleep with her, have a child with her that I'll consider to be my own, and then through our love triangle, we will have children together. So Jacob agrees, has not 1, but 2 children with Bilhah the maid, then marries her. So now he's got 3 wives. Leah, Rachel, Bilhah. Leah, she can't have more children after the fourth child, so she's now getting jealous of Rachel and this love triangle that they got going on. So she says, Jacob, how about you take my maid and do the same thing you're doing with Bilhah? Here's Zilpah, my maid, and sleep with her so you can add her to the mix. So he does. Jacob, probably not the smartest guy in the world. So he takes this 4th girl, marries this other maid, and starts having children with her too. So he has 2 kids with Zilpah. That's where we stopped the story last week, and that's where we pick up the story today, because it continues to get crazier and crazier. You think the Kardashian story is crazy? Jesus' family is way more drama than the Kardashians. So now Jacob's got 4 kids through Leah, 2 kids through Bilhah, 2 kids through Zilpah, and then Leah gets pregnant again with her child with Jacob. She has 2 more kids, and then after all that, Rachel and Jacob finally have a baby together. Rachel, again, she's the wife that he always wanted. He didn't want these other 3 wives. He always wanted Rachel to begin with, and he finally has a child with her. And I wish I could tell you this is a happily ever after story for Jacob and for Rachel, but that's not the case. Because she has 1 more child. Rachel has 2 children. If you're adding it all up, if you're the math person, there's 4 with Leah, 2 with Bilhah, 2 with Zilpah, 2 more with Leah, 2 more with Rachel. If you add them all up, anybody know? 12. Good math. Good for you. 12 sons that Jacob has. Now, the 11th son, his name is Joseph. Not to be confused with Mary and Joseph, the parents of Jesus. This is the Joseph of the Old Testament. This son is Jacob's favorite. Now, you might wonder, why is the 11th son Jacob's favorite? Well, again, if you remember, he had children with all the other wives, but they weren't his favorite wives. The girl he wanted to marry was Rachel, and the first son he had with Rachel became his favorite. There was 4 sons with Leah, 5 and 6 with Bilhah, 7 and 8 with Zilpah, 9 and 10 with Leah, and number 11 was Joseph, the first son he had with Rachel, and that son became Jacob's favorite. There's a whole crazy story that goes along with that, because the other 11 brothers found out that Joseph, number 11, is dad's favorite, so they began to conspire against Joseph to kill him. Now, that goes off on a whole different tangent that we're not going to go off on this morning because I don't have time for it. I will, however, come back to it in fall of 2022 because I'm dedicating an entire series to that tangent of the story with Joseph and the 11 brothers. So stay tuned. 9-10 months from now, we'll come back to that part of the story. But for right now, we're going to stay on the story of Judah. Again, Judah's number 4 in out of the 12 brothers. He's number 4. Number 12, his name was Benjamin. And that's Rachel and Jacob's 12th, or their second son together, but Jacob's 12th son. Unfortunately for Jacob, Rachel died during childbirth and died while she was giving birth to Benjamin, which is where we get the name Benjamin. So she's out of the picture. She dies. That's beside the point. So now Jacob has 12 sons. Jacob has 12 sons. Number 4 in the list is Judah. We're going to follow his story because he's listed in the genealogy of Jesus. So that's where we jump into the story. Genesis chapter 38, starting in verse 1. At that time, Judah left his brothers. Again, he's got 11 brothers. At that time, Judah left his brothers and went to stay down with a man of... let me read this again. Judah left his brothers and went down to stay with a man of Adullam named Hira. Everybody say Hira. Say it louder, like you're on a horse or something. Like, yeah, like Hira, yeah. That was lame. Okay, My enthusiasm should be infectious for your enthusiasm. So on the count of three, he-rah. Ready? 1, 2, 3. That was good. That was much better. Okay, so remember that name. We're going to come back to that name in a little while. So he leaves his brothers behind. He finds a dude named Hira, and he continues the story. Verse 2. There, Judah met the daughter of a Canaanite man named Shua. He married her and made love to her. Now, Judah, again, number 4 in the lineage of Jacob's sons, he gets married. He's got a friend named Hira. He gets married to this woman. We don't know her name. That doesn't matter right now. Verse 3. She, the wife of Judah, became pregnant and gave birth to a son whose name was Everybody say It's kind of like the old Budweiser commercial with the frogs, you know, Budweiser. There you go. So verse 4, she conceived again, Judah's wife conceived again and gave birth to another son, second son named Onan. She gave birth to yet a third son and named him Shelah. So you got 3 sons, Onan, and Shelah. Onan, Shelah. Onan, Shelah. I repeat that because you're going to remember those names. You need to come back to them. They're important for the story. Verse 6. Judah got a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. Everybody say Tamar. Not today, Tamar. Anyway, so Onan, Shelah, Dad Judah arranges a marriage with his oldest son, and her name is Tamar. So he arranges it, which I'm not going to lie, I'm not too opposed to arranged marriages, because in the United States of America, the divorce rate is 51%. You know what the divorce rate is for arranged marriages? 4%. That means it's a 96% success rate when somebody is in an arranged marriage. So I have 3 kids. I have a daughter who's 8, I have a son who's 6, and I have another son who's 3. If you would like to apply to marry my children, you can send your applications to 5101 North Dustin, 87401. And let's talk. We can make out a deal. We can arrange the marriage of our kids together because it's a 96%. I don't know how successful or how fruitful those marriages are, but it's a good percentage there. So marries this girl, Tamar, through an arranged marriage of Judah. However, poor he's not a part of the 96% rate. He's a part of the 4% failure rate. Why? Verse 7, but Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death. So again, Judah arranges the marriage of his oldest son, with a girl named Tamar. Well, did something bad in the eyes of the Lord, so God killed off Well, so then Judah feels bad. He feels bad for 2 reasons. He feels bad for, number 1, because he lost his oldest son, but he also feels bad for the girl, Tamar, that he set his oldest son up with. So he goes to the girl, he says, look, I'll make you a deal. Your husband, my oldest son, died, so why don't you take my second son, Onan? Why don't you take him, sleep with him, and then the kids that you can have a family together, and with that family, you can pretend that your kids that are really Onan's are your former husband kids, and you can have a family pretending that it's family and your family. So Judah goes to his middle boy, Onan, in verse 8 says this. Judah said to Onan, sleep with your brother's wife and fulfill your duty to her as a brother-in-law to raise up offspring for your brother. Now that seems kind of messed up to me. Onan, I don't think he was 100% on board. But Onan agrees. He says, okay, I'll sleep with my dead brother's wife so she can have my children and pretend that they're my brother's children instead. And this is where the story becomes a little bit sketch. This is probably the PG-13/rated R portion of the story. In fact, the next verse is in Genesis 38, verse 9. It's a little too sketch to even read because I know that we still have some young people that are perhaps watching online. So I'm going to read. I've been reading this whole story from the NIV translation so far, the New International Version. I'm going to switch out of that version and go to the NASB, the New American Standard Bible Version, for this particular verse because it's a little sketchy. It's a little rated R. So here's what happens next. Genesis 38, verse 9 in the NASB says, Onan knew that the child would not be his. So when he had relations with his brother's wife, he wasted his seed on the ground so that he would not give his child to his brother. If you go back and read the NIV translation, it's a little more racy. If you want it really rated R, go read the NLT translation, the New Living Translation. If you want to go even a step further than that, go read the New King James Version. All the translations are really, this is the most rated G version I could find for this particular verse. But basically, Onan sleeps with his dead brother's wife, and while they're in the act of sleeping together, he changes his mind and says, I don't want her to have my kids and say that they're my brother's kids. So he withdraws from that plan, if you know what I'm talking about. He pulls out of that plan, and it's no longer the plan. And so that's despicable because pretty much instead of following through and having the generation, he kind of raped this girl. And so that's despicable in the eyes of the Lord, obviously. So things don't go well for Onan as well. Verse 10, what Onan did was wicked in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death also. So now, we've got oldest brother, he did something wicked. We don't know what it was, but he was killed off by God. Onan did something wicked in the eyes of the Lord, so he was killed off by God. So here we have Tamar, the girl that was set up with the older brother of and then set up with Onan, who still has no family, still has no kids. So she's getting more and more frustrated through this process. Judah feels bad for her, but he's now starting to get a little bit worried. He says, I got one son left. There's Onan, and Shelah. And if I was set up Tamar with Shelah, my youngest son, what if he dies? I've only got one son left. And so he starts getting cold feet. Maybe I shouldn't set up my last remaining son with this girl because everybody I set her up with dies. So here's what Judah says to Tamar. Verse 11, Judah then said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, he says, live as a widow in your father's household until my son Shelah grows up. For Judah thought he may die too, just like his brothers. So Tamar went to live in her father's household. Here's what he's saying. He's saying, rather than me hook you up with my youngest son, my last son, Shelah, Tamar, go back and live at home. Go live with your parents. And when my youngest son is old enough to marry you, I'll call you. Don't call me. I'll call you. He's getting a little worried because if he says, if I set her up with my youngest son, I'm going to lose my last son as well. So Tamar, just move back home. So she does. She moves back home, anticipating there's going to be a day that she gets to marry the youngest boy. Now, I believe that Judah never anticipated connecting those two because Judah was too worried that he would lose his third and final son. Well, meanwhile, tragedy strikes again in Judah's household. He already lost his oldest son. He lost his second son. But when we continue on in the story, he now loses his wife as well. Genesis 38, verse 12. After a long time, Judah's wife, the daughter of Shua, died. Poor guy. When Judah had recovered from his grief, he went up to Timnah to the men who were shearing his sheep. And his friend Hira, remember Hira, that guy, his friend Hira, the Adullamite, went with him. So here's what is happening. Judah's wife dies. He's already lost his son, already lost Onan, and now his wife dies. He grieves the fact that his wife has died. And after he's grieved it, that's the time he's probably supposed to set up Tamar, the widow of his firstborn, and Shelah, his last remaining son. So he's grieved the loss of his wife. He should arrange the marriage, but instead, he goes to work out in the fields. Now, word gets back to Tamar that Judah's not setting them up in marriage. So Tamar's waiting and waiting and waiting, and she's been waiting this whole time, and she's anticipating that she's going to get to marry Shelah, the youngest, and still there is nothing to show for it. So she's getting more and more agitated. Verse 13. When Tamar was told, your father-in-law is on his way to Timnah to shear his sheep, in other words, to go back to work, she took off her widow's clothes, covered herself with a veil to disguise herself, and then sat down at the entrance of Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah. For she saw that though Shelah had now grown up, she had not been given to him as a wife. Now, there's a lot happening right now. There's a lot of details, and what happens next is really important. So I don't want you to glaze over, and I don't want you to miss out the details. So let me catch you up to speed in case you've already glazed over. Abraham has Isaac. Isaac has Jacob. Jacob has Judah. Judah has 3 sons, Onan, Shelah. Is his oldest son. He does an arranged marriage with this girl named Tamar. Marries Tamar. He does something wicked in the eyes of the Lord, so is killed off. She gets connected to Onan to continue her family on, but Onan does something wicked in the eyes of the Lord, so God kills Onan. So now Tamar, she's anticipating marrying the youngest son, but Judah's like, I don't know if I want to give you my youngest son because he's my last son. In fact, he's also lost his wife, so now he's like, this is my last remaining family member, so I don't know if Tamar, I want you to marry my youngest son because he's the last I've got in my family. So he avoids the whole thing, goes back to work instead of creating the arranged marriage between Shelah and Tamar. So Tamar is at her parents' house, and she's getting madder and madder, more and more and more frustrated. In fact, her frustration reminds me of a classic scene from a classic movie called My Cousin Vinny. Check out this clip.
What's the matter with you? No. You're acting like you're nervous or something.
Well, yeah, I am.
What are you nervous about? I'm the one that's under the gun here. Trial starts tomorrow.
You want to know what I'm nervous about? I'll tell you what I'm nervous about. I am in the dark here with all this legal crap. I have no idea what's going on. All I know is you're screwing up, and I can't help.
You lent me a little camera, didn't you?
Oh, Vinny, I'm watching you go down in flames, and you're bringing me with you, and I can't do anything about it.
And?
Well, I hate to bring it up because I know you got enough pressure on you already. But we agreed to get married as soon as you won your first case. Meanwhile, 10 years later, my niece, the daughter of my sister, is getting married. My biological clock is ticking like this, and the way this case is going, I ain't never getting married.
So this is how I think Tamar probably feels. She's like, I married because I want to have a family. He died. I was going to get with Onan, but he withdrew from that problem or that situation. So I still don't have a family. I don't have any kids to show. I'm supposed to marry Shayla. Judah, you're supposed to arrange this marriage, and my biological time clock is ticking like this, and at this rate, I ain't never getting married. She's getting mad. She's getting frustrated. So what does she do? She goes and disguises herself. And she finds out that Judah, the father of the three boys, Judah is going back to work, so she plants herself alongside the road in a disguised set of clothes so Judah, won't recognize that she is his dead brother's wife. She's waiting there for him. Now, you might be thinking, what is she waiting for? Is she going to ambush him? Is she going to jump him? Is she going to, share words with him, get in his face? What's going to happen? That's what we find out next. Verse 15. When Judah saw her on the side of the road, he thought she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face. Now, he doesn't recognize her. He doesn't know it's Tamar. He thinks she's a prostitute. Now, let me ask you this. What should he have done if he thought she was a prostitute? Several years ago, I went to Las Vegas for a DJ convention, and I'd never been there before, but I went probably 15, 20 years ago, something like that, and it was the first time going to Vegas, and I remember walking down the streets of Vegas, and somebody was, slapping cards right in front of me, and they handed me a card, and I thought it was a coupon, so I took it, and I looked at it, and it was a naked person. And I was like, I don't want this. I want to give it back. I don't want this. And they're not taking it back. And so what I realized is that there's tons of those people. I wanted to throw the card on the ground, but I looked around, and there's naked cards all over the ground already. In fact, it was way worse a couple decades ago. Vegas isn't as bad. They've cleaned up. But there's still people that go around, and they slap these cards, which tries to get your attention so they can give you a little card that has a number on it where you can call for prostitution services. Now, I don't know about you, but for me, if I'm walking down the streets of Vegas and that happens, now I don't even look. I don't look at the card. I don't look at the person. I don't make eye contact, because if I make eye contact, then they think I'm interested. I'm not interested. So I just stay in my zone and I keep walking, right? You should not be like, what's this about? You got prostitutes over here? Let me check that out. You should stay away from that. Look at what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 6:18. He says, flee from sexual immorality. All other sins a person commits are outside of the body, but whoever sins sexually sins against their own body. Another translation says, run from sexual immorality. Got to get away from it. Don't dabble with it. Don't entertain it. Flee. Run away from it. In the book of Proverbs, Solomon writes a story about a man who accidentally stumbled across a prostitute walking down the street. Here's what happened to this guy. Proverbs 7, verse 21. Solomon writes, with persuasive words, she, the prostitute, led the man astray. She seduced him with her smooth talk. All at once, he followed her like an ox going to the slaughter, like a deer stepping into a noose, till an arrow pierces his liver, like a bird darting into a snare, little knowing it will cost him his life. Now, unfortunately for Judah is alive way before the book of Proverbs was ever written. So Judah couldn't open up the book of Proverbs and read this warning, but you and I can. We can not only read God's warnings, but we also need to heed God's warnings. If you're taking notes, you can write that down. Read God's warnings and heed God's warnings. Do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says. Don't just read God's word. Actually heed God's word. I don't know where you are in your shopping process for Christmas this year, if you got more gifts to get like I do, but one of the most popular gifts let me show you a picture of one of the most popular gifts of this year. I don't know if you know what this is. Anybody have any idea? Raise your hand if you know what this is. These are virtual reality goggles. It's specifically the Oculus Quest that Facebook has come out with. It's one of the most popular toys or gifts of this particular year. Now, Now, I don't own a pair of the Oculus Quest. I don't own a pair of those goggles. And I can imagine that they might be fun. I mean, you could put on these virtual reality goggles and you can play a video game with somebody else from around the world, and maybe that's entertaining, that's engaging. But it's way more than just video games. I don't know if you heard this just a few weeks ago, but Mark Zuckerberg, CEO of Facebook, he announced that they're changing the parent company name of Facebook to Meta, which is short for Metaverse. And I don't know how familiar you are with this in the last few weeks. It's been all over the news. But where we're heading in our world, not just in Farmington, but our world, is a world that is a virtual reality world. Like it or not, this is the direction that our world is going. And it's not all bad. When people put on these goggles, it's not all bad because there's going to be the ability for surgeons from like the United States to be able to do surgeries on people in Uganda through virtual reality. That's good. There's going to be college professors that have capability of teaching college students from around the world in a virtual reality classroom. There's going to be mechanics that will be able to operate and work on your flying hover car from anywhere in the world using virtual reality. And not all virtual reality is going to be bad. In fact, there's going to be a time that there's going to be likely churches that meet online in virtual reality where people put on goggles and they join a virtual living room and have a life group with somebody else. In fact, just last week, Life Church, which is the largest church in North America, over 100,000 people, they launched their first virtual reality service. In fact, let me play a video. Craig Rochelle played this video. We'll dim the lights a little bit so you can see it, but I'm going to talk over it. Craig Rochelle posted this video just last week, and it's a video of a virtual campus at Life Church in Edmond, Oklahoma. They spent $1.2 million to create a virtual reality church service where people from anywhere in the world can come in and sit down with other people wearing virtual reality goggles and do church, do life with people from anywhere else in the world. Now, there's a day that perhaps more and more churches, I talked to several pastors just last week, more and more churches are going to have virtual reality campuses, virtual reality life groups, virtual reality Bible studies. And I know what many of you think right now. I know what you're thinking. I know what you're thinking online that you're watching right now. I know many of you are thinking, over my dead body. Many of you are like, I ain't ever going to put on a pair of virtual reality goggles. That ain't going to be me. That might be the future, but I opt out. I'm not participating. Here's what I'd say to that. Yes, you will. You know why I'd say that? Because you're going to have a grandchild, if you don't already. At some point, you're going to have a grandchild. And your grandchild is going to come up to you and say, Grandpa, Nima, Mimi, I'm having a virtual reality show and tell at school this Friday. Will you come into my virtual reality classroom with me with the goggles? And you're going to be like, drat. This is not what I want to do. I've sworn against putting on these virtual goggles, and I don't want to do it, but I'll do anything for my grandchild. So, okay. And you're going to put on these virtual reality goggles, and you're going to go into a virtual classroom from the comfort of your living room, but you're going to walk into some school, virtual reality school, with your grandchild, and you're going to sit down, and your grandchild's going to sit down in your virtual reality lap, and your grandchild's going to say, what I have for show and tell this week is my grandpa. It's my Mimi. And you're going to be crying in your virtual reality goggles, and you'll be like, love this. And it's going to be a new step for you. I know you're opposed to it right now, but there's going to be some good that comes with virtual reality down the road. But with good, there's also the potential for bad. Let me show you a clip of what I mean. Check out this video. There's the potential for bad. You might be fighting aliens or something, and then you run into a wall and you fall over. There's the potential for bad. But let me tell you, friends, we laugh at that video, but the potential for bad is way worse than that. The potential for bad is actually a potential for evil, pure evil. And here's what I mean by that. With the direction that we're going, again, like it or not, you can't change it. There's a metaverse that's going to be around us, and people are going to be wearing these goggles, and some is going to be good, but there's going to be an introduction of temptations that this world has never faced before. There's going to be the capability of you hiring a prostitute in the virtual reality meta world for less than a cup of coffee. The temptations that we're venturing into as a world through technology are going to be more tempting and more accessible than they ever have been in the history of the world in which we have lived so far. And I say all that because It's one thing to read God's word, but it's another thing to heed God's word. Read God's warnings and heed God's warnings. Look at what Solomon says in Proverbs 4:23. He says, above all else, guard your heart. For everything you do flows from it. Husbands, for the sake of your wife, guard your heart. Especially now as we head into this world that is this digital unknown metaverse. Husbands, guard your heart. Wives, for the sake of your husbands, guard your heart. Single people, for the sake of your future spouse, guard your heart. For the sake of your kids, for the sake of your grandkids, for the sake of your career, for the sake of your reputation, for the sake of your mental health, for the sake of your spiritual health, for the sake of your physical health, for the sake of your very soul, guard your heart. Now, guard your eyes, guard your ears, guard your mind, but Solomon says, above all else, guard your heart, because everything you do flows from that. Jesus says, for the overflow of your heart is what your mouth speaks. Everything you do flows out of your heart. Guard your heart. Judah's walking down the road with his buddy Hira, and he's walking down the road, and he didn't have the book of Proverbs to go back and read. So as he's walking along the road, he sees who he thinks is a prostitute planted on the side of the road. He hasn't had somebody tell him to guard his heart. So what does he do? He walks over to this woman, Genesis 38, verse 16. Not realizing that Tamar was his daughter-in-law, Judah walks over to her while he's walking to work, walks over to her, went over to her by the roadside and said, come now, let me sleep with you. He thinks she's a prostitute, so he walks over and says, let me sleep with you. Now, if I'm Hira, the guy that's the wingman, the buddy that's going with Judah, here's my response. Here's what I would say to Judah.
No, God! No, God, please, no! 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 No!
That's what I would yell. I would yell that. If I'm Hira, I would be like, no, God, please. Not in a blasphemous way. I would say, God, please don't let him do this. He's walking into a trap. Judah, don't do it. I would be yelling at him. I'd be screaming at him. Friends, we all need a Hira in our life who's willing to yell and say, don't do that. Don't make that choice. Don't make that decision. You're heading into destruction. You're going to ruin your life. No. You know what Hira said? As he watches his boy Judah walk over to this prostitute on the side of the road and says, come sleep with me. You know what Hira said? Nothing. He stood by and watched his friend Judah walk into this trap. And he said nothing. Friends, if you're the Hira, if you're the wingman, if you're the best man, if you're the maid of honor, if you're somebody's friend, you have to speak up. For the sake of your boy, for the sake of your girl, for the sake of whoever it is that's walking into danger, you're going to grab their arm and say, no, don't go that way. Don't go that path. Don't do it. You got to have a voice. You got to speak up. You got to speak up with your authority and say, don't destroy your life. Maybe it's a friend, maybe it's a neighbor, maybe it's a coworker, maybe it's a parent, maybe it's a kid. But don't just sit by and be like, well, he'll figure it out the hard way. No. You got to yell at him, get their attention, say something. Hira watches this go down, says nothing. Judah goes over to this woman who he thinks is a prostitute, says, come let me sleep with you. Well, she doesn't put out, I guess, that easily. So verse 16, she says, what will you give me to sleep with you? What are you going to pay me to sleep with you? Well, Judah's like, well, I don't know what I have. Like, he's got some lint in his pocket. He's maybe got some chapstick. Maybe he's got like a paper clip or something in his pocket. I don't have Venmo. Do you take PayPal? Like, I don't have anything to pay you. And so he says in verse 17, he says, tell you what, I'll send you a young goat from my flock. I'll Amazon Prime you a goat, but I don't have anything with me right now. But I'll send you a young goat from my flock, he says. Well, she says, will you give me something as a pledge until you send it? In other words, she says, what kind of collateral are you going to give me? You're going to give me any collateral? You're going to send me a young goat later, but what proof do you have? What collateral can you give me to know that you're actually going to send me the young goat? And he says, well, I don't really have anything. He says in verse 18, he says, what pledge shall I give you? What collateral do you want? Well, here's what she says, verse 18b. She says, your seal and its cord and the staff in your hand. Your seal and its cord and the staff in your hand. Now, and what's a seal and its cord? Well, a seal would be a ring. Like a wedding ring or some sort of a ring. It's got the family emblem or perhaps a letter from his name. It's something that identifies who he is, because this is the type of seal when they were sending letters back then. Instead of licking an envelope in the back, they'd put a drop of wax and they would push their ring into it and seal the letter. That would be the seal. It was a signature ring, a signet ring. And that's how they would seal it. So in this case, oftentimes people wouldn't wear the ring on their fingers. They would wear it in a necklace around their neck. So she says, I want the seal and the cord. The cord is the necklace that the ring around his neck is on. And she says, I want your staff too, his walking stick. All three of those were unique to Judah. So it's almost like an ID, like a driver's license. All three of them would identify Judah as the owner. So she says, I want your seal, its cord. I want your ring and its cord, the necklace, and I want your walking stick, because all three of them can identify who you are until you send me the young goat. So Judah says, fine. Here's the ring around my neck. Here's the necklace. Here's my staff. You can have all this, and then eventually I'll send you the young goat in exchange. That'll be the collateral in the meantime. So they go off, presumably behind the bushes, and do their thing. Meanwhile, Hira, it's just, how awkward is that? I mean, he's just, la-di-da-di. I guess I'll just be over here while y'all do your thing over there. Well, they finish up. Judah comes back over with Hira. They start walking to work like they were heading in the first place. Meanwhile, Tamar, she picks up and she heads back home. She goes back to her parents' house, changes out of the prostitution clothes, puts on her old widow clothes, and pretends like nothing happened. Well, Judah gets to work. He's like, hey, I got to go send a prostitute a young goat. So he gets a goat, sends a messenger with the goat, says, go find the prostitute on the side of the road, give her this goat, get my ring, get my staff, get my necklace back. So the messenger's got this goat. He goes and delivers the goat. When he looks around, he's like, where's the prostitute? She was here. She's not here anymore. So he goes back to Judah. He's like, I tried, but she wasn't there. I tried to drop off the goat, but there is no prostitute. He's like, huh. Judah says, well, she was there. I was just there. But I guess it's all good. I guess we just don't have to worry about it. We'll just let her keep those things and we'll keep the goat. So it's all good, no problem. Well, there was a problem, because a couple months later, Tamar starts showing. She's pregnant. And word starts to get around that she's pregnant, and word gets back to Judah that she's pregnant. Verse 24b, somebody comes to Judah and says, your daughter-in-law, Tamar, is guilty of prostitution, and as a result, she is now pregnant. Well, this makes Judah mad because he doesn't know he's the one that slept with her. So he's mad. So verse 24c, Judah said, bring her out and have her burned to death. Nice double standard that he has going on, right? So verse 25, they bring her out and they're tying her up to the stake. They're getting ready to light the match and burn this girl at the stake. Verse 25, as Tamar was being brought out, she sent a message to her father-in-law that said, I'm pregnant by the man who owns these. And she added, see if you recognize whose seal and cord and staff these are. They're tying her at the stake. They're about to light her up on fire, burn her at the stake for prostitution. She says, one final wish. I want to send a message back to my father-in-law. Take this ring, take this necklace, take this staff, and say, the guy that made me pregnant is the owner of these. And so the messenger, he's like, I'm supposed to give you this ring, this necklace, and this staff. She said, you know who these belong to, because who these belong to is the father of the child that's inside her. At which point Judah's like, oh, snap. I thought the girl on the side of the road was a prostitute. It's my dead son's wife. I impregnated my dead son's wife. So he says, don't light the match, don't light the match, don't light her up on fire. He stopped from lighting her up on fire. She winds up giving birth. And that's where we pick up the story, verse 27. When the time came for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb, not just one son, 2 sons, both boys. And Tamar named those boys Perez, everybody say Perez, and Zerah. Say Zerah. Perez and Zerah. Now, this is a crazy story that Judah, who's in the lineage of Jesus, winds up sleeping with a hooker on the side of the road and then finds out it's his dead son's daughter, and they have not one but 2 boys, and they're named Perez and Zerah, and now he is a father again through his dead son's former wife. This is just a train wreck of a family tree and a family story. That all being said, let's go back to the genealogy of Jesus and see what other names that we find in the family tree of Jesus' crazy, nutty family. Matthew chapter 1, starting in verse 1. This is the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac, Isaac the father of Jacob, Jacob the father of Judah and the brothers, the 11 brothers. Judah, the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar. Are you kidding me? The 3 names we introduced, so far we've only talked about 7 names, but we just introduced 3 new names. And those 3 names are all in the family tree of Jesus. They're all mentioned in Jesus' family tree. Abraham shouldn't be there because he didn't trust in God. He slept with his maid. Isaac shouldn't be there because Ishmael should have been, but Ishmael got booted out of the family by Abraham. And Isaac had Esau and Jacob. Jacob shouldn't be in the genealogy. Esau should be, but Jacob's there. Jacob has 12 sons, the fourth of which is Judah. Judah sleeps with his dead son's wife by accident, thinking she's a prostitute. And then they have 2 kids, Perez, Zerah. Neither one of them should have been there. And then you have Tamar, which, by the way, side note, of the 104 people that are in the genealogy of Jesus, there's only 5 women that are listed. Not because there weren't more women that are in the family tree. They just weren't documented. They just weren't listed. Of 104 names, only 5 women. Did you know that 3 out of the 5 were prostitutes? 3 out of the 5 women in Jesus' family tree were prostitutes. Why do I share this buck-nutty, crazy story with you of Jesus' family affair? Why do I share this crazy story? Here's why. Because if God can use Jesus' messy family tree, then God can use people just like you and me. Christmas Eve is this Friday. 1 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 5 o'clock services. And over the last couple of weeks, I've been saying, hey, invite your coworkers, invite your friends, invite your neighbors, invite your family members. Jesus himself said, you are the light of the world. Don't put the light under a bowl. Put the light on the top of the stand, the lampstand. You're a city on a hill. You are the light of the world. And even though I've been calling you out and challenging you for the last couple of weeks to invite somebody to the service for Christmas Eve that they're 90% likely to say yes to, most people watching online, most people in here, you haven't invited anybody. You've got the light of Jesus in you, and you're keeping it under a bowl. You're hoarding Jesus for yourself. If God can use Jesus' messy family tree, then he can use people just like you and me. What's your excuse for why you're hoarding Jesus? What's your excuse why you haven't walked to your neighbor's house and said, would you come with me to Christmas Eve? You're 90% likelihood that they're going to say yes. And it's not just about Christmas Eve, friends. It's the fact that this world is dying around us, and people desperately need Jesus. And you've got the answer. You've got Jesus. You have the ability to invite somebody. If you got a 9 out of 10 chance that they'll say yes, then why aren't you inviting? Perhaps you already have, but if you haven't, you got 5 days. 5 days. If Jesus can change lives, and if God can use Jesus' messy family tree, then he no doubt can use people just like you and me. So here's my question for you as we wrap up this morning. Who's coming with you this Christmas Eve? Not just who have you invited, who's going to be sitting next to you? You might not feel worthy. You might feel like, well, who am I to introduce somebody to Jesus? Isn't that the whole story? Isn't that the whole messy family tree? You got a dad sleeping with his dead son's wife and having kids, and their names are in the family tree, and you're telling me God can't use you? If God can use Jesus' messy family tree, no doubt he can use people just like you and me. Let's pray. God, we come to you right now this morning. Every one of us has a story. Every one of us has history. Every one of us has baggage. We've all sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And yet, God, you give us grace through your Son, Jesus. And for the majority of people in this room, the majority of people watching online right now, Jesus, your Son, God, has radically transformed our lives. Doesn't mean every day is easy, but Jesus, in the grace that he provides, the hope, the purpose that he provides, has radically turned our lives upside down and inside out for the better. And yet many of us are keeping that good news, the good news of the gospel, to ourselves. We are in the place you've planted us. Our place of work, our school, our community, our neighborhood. God, you have planted us where you want us to make a difference, to be a light in this world. And some of us are keeping the light under a bowl. We're sorry. We repent from that. We don't want to hoard your Son, Jesus. We don't want to hoard the gospel and the good news that comes from the story of Christmas. We want to get that story out there. So God, will you plant people in our sphere of influence? 2 people, 20 people, 200 people in the next 5 days. That we'd be bold and courageous to invite to sit with us at 1 o'clock, 3 o'clock, or 5 o'clock on Christmas Eve and hear the message of a life-changing gospel. If you can use Jesus' crazy family tree, then you can use people just like me just like these people that are here this morning. Here we are, God. Use us. Bring us the people. Bring us the conversations. Bring us the opportunities where in the next 5 days we can invite people, that you would use broken, sinful us to introduce people that need your Son, that we could introduce them to the gospel, that perhaps might change their life as well. Let us, allow us. Thank you for choosing to utilize us to introduce people to Jesus Christ. And it's in his name that we pray. Amen. Before you go, I've got two quick announcements, and I know it's 10:03 right now, so hang with me for just a minute. If you'd like to give a tithe or a gift or a donation, you're welcome to do that on our app. You can download the app or on our website or any of the boxes in the room. Let me address that for really quickly. I don't know if you've heard, but the CARES Act has come out with special mandates this year. Not mandates, but loopholes, I guess you could call them. And one of the loopholes is that if you give before the end of this year, before December 31st, you get 100% of your AGI written off, which is adjusted gross income, which basically means it used to be that it was up to 60% that you could write off of donations. It's now 100% of your income that you can write off, which means there's never been a better time to give than right now. You get more bang for your buck right now than any other time. You have till December 31st. If you would like to give an end-of-year gift, please do that. It benefits you more than ever. If you'd like prayer for anything, feel free to come forward and have prayer. This coming Christmas Eve is Friday, 1 o'clock, 3 o'clock Friday, and 5 o'clock on Friday. We'll see you there for Christmas Eve. Who's coming with you? If God can use Jesus' messy family tree, no doubt he can use people just like you and me. Thank you for joining us this morning, and we'll see you on Friday for Christmas Eve.
Mountains. Have you ever felt like you just couldn't be yourself? Like it'd be easier if you were someone else? Is there a voice inside your mind that reminds you all the time the ways you're broken?